Is Eren free? Who's the villain of this story? These are questions that I'm sick of hearing. So today we're talking about Jean.
If you got the gas, I got diesel trucks. Blow on my ass to block heated.
Yes, I'm ripping off Invader's video. No, I never received Invader's blessing, and to make matters worse, I'm a filthy anime only, so I didn't even get to watch the poor guy's video. Let's do it anyway. Jean Kirstein. Attack on Titan's friendly neighborhood side character with an impressive redemption arc, from a coward to a hero, from a follower to a leader. More than this, I think analyzing Jean's character opens up a valuable conversation on psychology. How do we change? How does one willingly throw away comfort and choose to face the conflicts of life? Through Jean, I think Attack on Titan provides a pretty profound answer, and digging up that remedy may change the way we see Jean. Alright, this is the disclaimer part of the video. I'm just gonna rattle them all off. No manga spoilers because I haven't read it. We spoil up to the 84th episode of the anime, and we're considering the events of an OVA canon as they're mentioned and referenced in the main series. Anyway, in Season 1, we meet Jean in the form of a pompous prick whose only goal is comfort. To discuss how such a coward could become a hero, let's figure out exactly how he became a coward in the first place. If you didn't know, Jean has his very own episode. It was released as an OVA by Wit Studio in 2014 called The Torturous Curse of Youth. Although a pretty lighthearted treatment to Attack on Titan, this episode provides some great insight into who Jean is and why he became who he is. The episode makes one thing clear. Jean's mother loves him. In fact, she's suffocated him with love since adolescence. This is a very privileged kid. As Jean grew into his teenage years, his mother continued to stifle him with affection, much to his disdain. We see Jean trying to pull himself away from her, and it ends rather unsuccessfully. His teammates egg him on, not about his mom, but about his clear insecurity surrounding the situation.
母ちゃんに会いたくてうずうずしてんのか？そうなんですか？なわけねえだろ！
I think Jean's mother is actually the key to a lot of this. Jean's mother is a lovely woman, with an abundance of care to go around. However, for Jean, her surplus of affection and the privileges she gave him have turned into a crutch, a defect in a way. This crutch is what analytical psychologists call a mother complex. Jean's got some mommy issues. I know that sounds nuts. I promise I'm going to tie all this up. A mother complex is an irrationally strong pull towards safety and protection, ease of living and immediate gratification. It's a pull towards the same kind of lifestyle a mother typically gives her younger children. People with mother complexes just don't want to grow up. They do not under any condition want to face life. Or in the means of Attack on Titan, face what's beyond the walls.
生きたきゃ壁の外でもどこでも行け。俺は絶対憲兵団に入る。
And this complex is fine at 6 or 7 years old, not so much at 15 when someone like Jean should be maturing and finding their place in the world. We see evidence of this in Jean's career aspirations. He believes the military police, a cushioned, coddled, and convenient life on the interior, the womb of paradis, if you will, is the safety and warmth he's looking for. He has no problem being blunt about it with Marco, saying,
憲兵団に入るのは内地での安全で快適な暮らしが待ってるからだろうが。
そんな。
Although Jean rejects his mother, he still subconsciously searches for that childlike level of responsibility beyond her in the world, behind Wall Sina. Wonderful and as caring as she is, a mother who forces herself into every part of a child's life later than he needs it will accidentally create what the Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung called an eternal child. This is one who is cursed by his adolescence. And just to mention, this adolescence, this kind of regression, is largely what started Attack on Titan's conflict, with Karl Fritz renouncing his responsibility to fight and fleeing to a safer and warmer place. You see men like Jean and Karl Fritz outside of cartoons. They're the grown men who love ideas but never follow through, the ones who fear life and escape from it into the comfortable, safe, and sanitized confines of instant gratification. I know a lot of this is like very speculative, the whole mother complex thing, but I mean, We saw an overbearing mom, and then we saw issues later in life usually associated with an overbearing mom. The shoe is fitting. Let's shit on his dad a bit before we move on. This eternal boyhood is the tragically typical outcome of an overbearing mother and a relatively absent father. Notice the only time we ever see Jean's father is in one quick shot with half his face cut off. They literally kept him out of the picture. And like the father of psychoanalysis said, I cannot think of any need in childhood as strong as the need for a father's protection. A boy like Jean needs guidance out of the wonderland a mother's love creates. That's why you hear so many cases of ancient tribes and older civilizations having rites of passage where the boys of the village are separated from their mothers and undergo trials initiated by the men. However, Jean had no such fatherly intervention, and in absence of this, Jean was never able to face the things he had to. Speaking of which, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. This would explain why Jean gets so defensive when people mention his mother. They hold up a mirror and he doesn't like what he sees. Whereas someone like Thomas can pay his parents a heartfelt visit without holdup, Jean just can't face the woman who lives in his head. We see more proof of Jean's mother issues in his interactions with other women. When he falls head over heels for Mikasa just glancing at her, I'm reminded of what the American poet Robert Bly said. What does it mean when a man falls in love with a radiant face across the room? It may mean that he has some soul work to do. How does Jean finally tend to his soul? How does he move past his regressive attitude about life and go beyond the walls? It's evident within the course of human history that men have to betray their mother's wishes to at least some degree. In an old myth called Iron John, Iron John, I didn't even notice that until I was editing. The main character has to steal the key to his independence, and as the myth says, the key is under your mother's pillow. Betrayal is part of the deal. This betrayal, however, doesn't happen in the self-righteous screaming that Jean does in the dining hall, or in the casting of a blanket over his shame. Rather, it's how German psychologist Erich Fromm describes, independence is not achieved simply by not obeying mother. Independence is only possible if man actively grasps the world. In the case of Jean, there were circumstances, tragedies he underwent that pushed him to grasp the world, grasp the key, and finally go beyond the walls. The death of Marco. Jean's loss of Marco was his coming-of-age apotheosis. For once in his life, rather than shying away from pain, he looked into it, and he found his cowardice. His initiation into adulthood, then, was joining the Scouts. I mean, Isayama literally depicted it as an initiation. A student of Jung's named Marie-Louise von Franz reinforces this, saying, "To be in a situation where there is no way out is the classical beginning of the process of individuation." Jean was fearful, but that terrible fear of death he felt that night was actually Jean's first taste of living. No mother wants their boy in a situation like this. Any loving mother would do everything within her power to prevent it. But as Isayama shows us, grasping the world through your wound is step one. Watching the first season back for this video, I noticed what could be a parallel. As Jean mourns looking down at his palm, he clenches it. This is very similar to Eren's behavior in the second episode after losing his mother. It's looking upon your pain, your suffering, that symbolic loss of a mother's protection that pushes us, forces us to become heroic. Notice how in mourning Jean sees Marco, his brave and righteous friend, leader of Squad 19, whose name literally descends from the Latin word meaning male. When Marco leaves the world, he becomes a part of Jean, meaning Jean finally mends with the masculine part of himself. Marco was and is the leadership and internal strength that would rescue Jean from the part of him that his coddled life built. This is when Jean finally admits. I've used the word hero several times throughout this video, and I just want to touch on what it means. As Jung explains in The Psychology of the Child archetype, a hero is one who overcomes the monster of darkness It is the long hoped for and expected triumph of consciousness over the unconscious. In this equation, Jean is the consciousness, and his regression, his cowardice, are the unconscious. And his decision to finally cast himself into the unknown is his triumph. Kneeling beside the corpses of his fallen comrades, Jean realizes something vital. He will either undergo the agony of life, going beyond the walls, or he'll undergo both the pain of his cowardice and then what's beyond the walls finding him anyway. Hajime Isayama, writer of the series, explains the same idea in an interview.
その物語になぞらえるなら、じゃあ壁の中にいればずっと安全かと言えば、そんなこともなくて、この世界に閉じこもっていてもその厳しい現実が来て、なんとなくそういうイメージがありましたね。
Jean realizes that the consequences of remaining stagnant and whole are worse than moving forward broken. Once he chooses to face life, the characters around him take notice. When one cultivates a heroic attitude about life, they undergo very noticeable metamorphosis, especially in their social life.
お前、本当にジャンなのか？俺の知るジャンは自分のことしか考えてない男のはずだ。失礼だな。
Jean becomes proof, especially in later seasons, that facing the cold of life actually leads to new warmth, like the author Albert Camus illustrates. In the depth of winter, I finally learned that within me there lay an invincible summer. This summer, as Attack on Titan shows us, turns out to be vastly more nourishing than anything a mother, no matter how good her intentions, can give a son. Also notice in the opening of Season 2, we see a bronze fixture of a mother and son atrophy and fall apart. It's by this tragic atrophy between a mother and son that characters like Jean and Eren can become heroes. Eren Yeager starts as your classic shonen hero, with a burning heart and unquenchable aspirations. Jean, however, follows the path of the traditional hero. Joseph Campbell, an American writer and professor, studied myths cross-culturally, and found in the majority of heroic tales told since the beginning of time, there are established sequences the hero typically undergoes. This is the hero's journey. It's what Luke Skywalker underwent. It's the one Harry Potter underwent, all the way back to Gilgamesh, the first heroic story written over 4,000 years ago. Jean begins in his mundane life, drawing pictures of girls unable to talk to them, living under the loving foot of his mother. After joining the military, Eren offers him a call to adventure, a heroic demand where Jean's worldview is challenged. Just as most heroes do, Jean denies it at first. He refuses the call, writing Eren off as a... However, after the colossal titan appears again, Jean crosses the first threshold, and is thrown into a battle he wanted no part of. We move then into the belly of the whale, a climax where the hero must undergo an upheaval, an enormous change to survive. The walls on Paradis are the whale Jean's been swallowed by. He must sacrifice the part of himself his mother built, and choose the harsh sting of life outside of the walls. So begins Jean's road of trials, where parts of him will be destroyed and other parts of him born. This road of trials proves to Jean what Robert Bly concluded: it is not our job to remain whole. We came to lose our leaves like the trees and start again, drawing up from the great roots. There's a reason Jean was so hostile towards Eren earlier in the story. Deep down, Jean knew he was a coward. He knew his boyhood had been reaching into his adulthood, and he saw in Eren what he sought within himself. Every eternal boy yearns for at least the idea of heroism, and Jean was so incredibly jealous that Eren was capable of being heroic. Seeing heroism, letting it inspire you, even in the form of envy, is often a part of the process, just as it was for Jean. After 77 episodes, he finally says so outright. Jean's envy turns into inspiration, and he finally becomes a hero. It's how the American athlete Arthur Ashe describes, True heroism is remarkably sober, very undramatic. It is not the urge to surpass all others at whatever cost, but the urge to serve others at whatever cost. And in his service to humanity, giving himself up to something greater than himself, Jean conquers his mother complex, is cracked open like an egg, and a selfless leader emerges, capable of taking on the world. This isn't to say his struggle is over, though. Season 4 of Attack on Titan introduces a new level of honesty and heroism you rarely ever see. In real life, the hero who was once a coward comes with a fatal flaw. A man who has a mother complex will always have to contend with his tendencies toward becoming an eternal boy. As Jean is faced with more and more brutality, as his worldview is challenged further, we see Regression begin to rear its head once more.
何も聞かなかった。引くな。考えるな。このままじっとしていれば、セントラルの一等地が手に入る。
Notice a recurring behavior of his. Jean covers his ears when faced with high-pressure situations. He shows us that even a hero can dangerously regress away from facing life. Take, for example, episode 84's entire teaser is an elaborate fantasization of Jean's, who is revealed to still be dreaming of the interior, despite all the time that's passed. However, like Jean shows us, childlike desires don't make someone a coward. What makes Jean strong is choosing to contest his immature wishes, even when tempted with the regression offered by Flock, and you can see a very genuine interest in his eyes. He remains steadfast, true to his code, and doesn't fall to the illusions he was offered. This resilience is reflected in his exchange with Onyankopon.
あのまま耳を塞いで部屋にこもっていたかった。それじゃあ骨の燃えかすが俺を許してくれるんだ。
I don't know if this is a stretch, but I'm definitely seeing some similarities here. The thing is, and this realism is part of what I love about Attack on Titan, it would have made sense for Jean's character to have chosen either path here. That's why it's believable when he feigns his support for Flock. The dragon of regression is not slain. It is fought throughout the course of one's entire life. And in the daily battle of heroism versus cowardice, Jean makes the right choice anyway. Real quick, I want to mention some more symbolism stuff. It's mentioned in the Attack on Titan encyclopedia that Jean and Armin were originally written as the same character, but Isayama separated the two, and I think it's clear why. Armin represents the positive side of youth, the capacity to find beauty in the world beyond material, cultural, or social, beyond the walls. Jean, however, represents the dangers of a prolonged youth, the dangers of remaining adolescent. Armin is youth, Jean is the shadow of youth. Hajime Isayama explicitly said, "I created Jean and Armin as representatives of humanity." And humanity, youth, carries a shadow called cowardice. In this cowardice and regression is the root of all addiction, all self-induced agony, all neuroses. The cure then, as Jean shows us, comes in the form of heroism. Speaking of addiction and material pleasures, notice Jean places an emphasis on alcohol in his daydreams. And I feel like this actually brings us to a good point to end the video with. Notice how prominent the symbol of wine is in Season 4. Like Jung once said in a letter, alcohol in Latin is spiritus, and you use the same word for the highest religious experience as well as for the most depraving poison. Spiritus contra spiritum. This translates literally to spirit versus spirit, youth versus youth. Yet, Jean trades his regression for the blade of a hero. Jean becomes based. There is a great deal of pain in life, and perhaps the only pain that can be avoided is the pain that comes from trying to avoid pain.
戦え